So, that being said, I'm going to bring on our guest right now, and boom, there he is.
Hey, Henri. So good to be here.
I, I'm super happy to have you here. I know you're a very busy engineer, and you stay busy. I'll just leave it at that. So
I try to keep busy.
well, you clearly are. I'm really appreciative of the opportunity to have a little chit chat with you and see what it is that you're up to. Let me make sure this is off. Yeah, it is.
It's great to be here. It's been a while. We don't work together anymore, and that's a bummer. So
It was a bummer. We
yeah,
could talk about that
So it's
another
good to see
day.
you again.
Yeah, likewise. Honestly, we have so much to catch up on, so I'll keep that to a separate stream. Uh, that being said, I'd like to literally just let you sort of take over and let the people know who you are, where you work, and we'll go from there.
Sure. My name is Scott Jehl. I work at SquareSpace on web performance. So SquareSpace is the CMS website creator for businesses large and small. It's been around for decades, and it's very widely used. Millions of websites run on it. And so my role at Squarespace is to maintain and improve the performance and accessibility and reliability alongside several others who do that work as well. And there's just loads of talented people at Squarespace, so it's a great place to work. I've been learning a lot, and I've been there a little over a year now. I guess, almost coming up on a year and a half. So we're headquartered here in New York City, and so it's been great. My career leading up to this point has been not really on any particular product like I am now. I was in the agency world for 15 years at Filament Group in Boston, and had a different client every 3 to 6 months and lots of variety of work. Then I went into tools for a little bit and worked alongside you, Henri, web page test. And so, it's nice to be focused on one project with longevity to see things through on a longer term. And that's where I am today.
It's I know you sort of like race through some of that, and I understand why, but I have to say, and maybe I'm just going to add my little bit, is your agency days and the Filament Group. And for those who may not know, the Filament Group had done a lot of significant work and published the results that were widely discussed. Because they're out of Boston, is that correct?
Yep, still are. Yeah.
Yes. Did you want to quickly sort of touch on that? Because I think you and the people there had shared like significant information around some of these clients that you're working with, and especially if I'm remembering this right, you were working with publishers.
Sure. So when I joined, the company had already been working as a design agency for many years, their sort of core focus is broadly usable and accessible design. Mm-hmm. That was extended to front end development and design, especially during the time that I was working there, and there was always just a emphasis on making things work well for the broadest audience possible. And that, of course, involved not only accessibility and accessible practices and working with, other developers with disabilities and, learning how to test properly to make sure things work as well as possible, but also extended into, performance, especially as the performance industry or field, I guess, started to grow and, metrics evolved and ways to verify that that web pages were being delivered performantly, got better and better, and the practices got better around it. So we tried to stay, deeply involved in that. We had some really, we were lucky to have some really amazing clients around the time that the mobile, devices started to become popular enough that it was, suddenly a concern. How do we build websites for all these different display sizes and different form factors and connection speeds? And we landed a really interesting project around that time in 2010 with the Boston Globe.
Yes.
And the Globe took this really impressive, bet that responsive design was the right technology to use to solve the problem that they had, which is they had all these users on very different devices, and even back to IE6 was actually in the user base then for desktop, and they wanted to have a sane way to manage delivering to all these different form factors and build code with a relatively small team that they could maintain without having separate sites and different technologies driving it. And I look back and think it was impressive that they took the risk to use that technology, and it really paid off for them. I think that project was really viewed as a success, and for us at Filament Group, I think it led to a lot of more interesting work. We went on to work for building the Lego store front end, and all sorts of conferences and book projects and things that came out of that. So yeah, it was a great time in my career. I miss working with them, and they're still going. Patty and Todd are still going strong in Boston. So definitely look them up. It's a great design shop.
The Boston Globe story is the one I remember extremely well, and so much so that I used to go to the Boston Globe website regularly, and if I'm not mistaken, they had, I think there was a section of the Boston Globe which was like big pictures. Like they would just have this section of just huge like photography, and they had a particular name for that section, but I used to go through that all the time. And
I'm pretty sure it was called The Big Picture.
Okay, that's it. Yeah, I think it was. Yes.
Because you said that, and I wouldn't have recalled that, but I think you're right.
I was on that site a lot, dude.
And
I think in part because I'd read about the work, and I just kept going all the time. So absolutely, I think that was a very successful project. At the very least, it exposed the idea of performance to, I think, a lot of people. I'm going to interject very quickly and hold that thought. Since we are talking about pictures, if I'm not mistaken, today is October 1st, and it is the 30-something anniversary of the which format? The PNG. I think it's today.
Nice.
I'm a bit of a.
You're really good on those dates.
I always think they're interesting. I love going back and just seeing like what was going on, 30 years ago or whatever. Let me see. Ping, ping, ping. There we go. And it is today, 28 years ago. Yeah, look at that.
Wow.
Anyhow,
that's wild. I mean, that section that you mentioned was really, I think, critical in proving out some ideas that influenced some of the design for the web standards that we got for delivering responsive images. It certainly wasn't the code that was on that particular site at that time that led exactly to it, but a lot of the people involved in writing the specifications and the HTML element for picture, source set sizes, were on the team that built those templates on the Boston Globe. Matt Marquis, in
Mm.
particular, was lead author on the spec.
Wow.
So, yeah, yeah, that was an exciting time, and we, at the time, we struggled with, how to deliver images in a reasonable way to small and large screens, and there wasn't really any, particularly elegant solution. We had to rely on, I think, serving a reasonable smallish size up
Mm.
front and swapping it out with a larger one for desktop, ideally in a way that didn't download both. And nowadays we just don't have to think about those things.
Yeah.
They're built into the browser. But yeah, it was challenging at the time.
Yeah. I know Andy Davies would say today that you just don't have to think about it. Don't bother. Use some services, and like you'd mentioned, the browser is now fully in charge of that. I had Yoav on last week, who was also, I think, somewhat involved in the
Very
imaging.
involved. He wrote the Chrome implementation, or the Chromium, and WebKit, I believe, WebKit
Yeah.
too,
Yeah. Yeah.
to support the picture element and source set and sizes. Yeah, Yoav's brilliant.
Yeah. He definitely is. And again, I don't want to sort of like, deep dive into your career, but I think it's significant that, the Boston Globe story that reverberated in the community and was a big topic, especially around the images. At some point, you find yourself working on web page test as well, a tool that many regard as the Cadillac in performance. Did you want to describe very quickly, what it was like working on a tool after using it for several years yourself?
Yeah, sure. I mean, at some point along the way, Filament started to get client work that was purely doing performance audits and accessibility audits. And for the performance ones, we were using tools like Lighthouse and Web Page Test. And Web Page Test in particular is still, a go-to tool for me for deeper dives into what is going on with page rendering and the waterfall, and all these features that that a lot of tools offer now.
Yeah.
And I think Debug Bear and Speed Curve and Caliber. There are so many that that offer a variety of features that make testing these things a lot easier these days.
Yeah.
But yeah, we were at the time using Web Page Test a lot, and when it came time for Catchpoint to build out a team to sort of expand that product's feature set and sort of like take it to a next level of sorts, they reached out to some people, you included, who were sort of vocal about working with the tool, I think, and knew it deeply and knew the audience well. I was really lucky that Tim Cadleck was already on the team and thought to reach out to me about it. So yeah, it was a hard decision to leave Filament Group for any reason, but I felt like the time was right to start focusing on a product and in performance at that time. And yeah, it was a great run, getting to work there for a little while and build the experiments product into Web Page Test, which I mean I still use it like constantly. My team at SquareSpace uses it to prove out ideas. It's just it's very easy to test the efficacy of this optimization or that live on a website and see if it moves the needle, and then decide if you actually want to do the work, So yeah, it's good.
And I brought that up simply because, for those listening, for me, it feels like you've quietly had a like such influence, in performance in the community, having done that work over at the Filament Group, and then working on web page tests, building out incredible features that people are, raved about and rave about to this day. So I think that's it's
Thanks,
a
Henry.
must mention. Oh, by all means. Um, let's sort of like put that aside and um, quickly describe the moment you felt that you wanted to work in performance. Like, was it, something that happened? Was it something that you read, that made you realize, oh, I'm going to spend some time working in this space?
Yeah. Um, yeah. So I'm somewhat of a believer in, firsthand exposure to problems being really, you know, influential in getting people to care about them,
Hmm.
unfortunately. And I can say that happened in my case. We were already pretty aware of, conceptually the idea that people were uh, experiencing the websites that we built at Filament Group differently depending on the device they had and their connection speed and all those sorts of things. Um, but after the Boston Globe went online, sometime after that, my wife and I went backpacking through Southeast Asia for like 8 months. And she was working over there at the time, volunteering. And I had sort of kept somewhat of an open source workload through Filament going, despite the time zone shift. So I was working on jQuery mobile at the time,
Mm.
and leading the development on that project. Particularly from Cambodia, I remember being there for 3 or 4 months and working every day on websites that I could, very obviously see were not working very well on the devices that I could find at mobile kiosks in Siem Reap, where I was working, at cafes during the day. And, the internet speeds were variable. Wi-Fi was often good if I was at a cafe, but, cell speeds at the time were really different than they were in the US where I was used to. And I don't know, I think, that first exposure, I guess got me, just a lot more interested in the problem and how it connects to, being able to reach a broader audience, just like accessibility does.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I would say that was the point at which I started to focus on it more.
Mhm.
And, I think it was like maybe a year prior to that, there was the Velocity conference that
Mhm.
I attended. And, so like people were talking about these things and it seemed like a small tight knit community was starting to form around it. So yeah, just that pretty much got me interested in that direction, I think.
Interesting. And, you're not the first person to have mentioned sort of like a mobile experience. I had Jakob Gross over from Framer, and he talked about, growing up with low-powered phones, low-powered devices because he couldn't afford like the big shiny ones. And he would look at his friends who had them, and they'd look at the same site. His experience was completely different, and he
Mhm.
wanted to know why, and he realized what was going on. I guess you couldn't
Yeah.
access New York Times from these little mobile phones in Asia. Is that what was going on? It was
Uh,
like struggling,
yeah,
struggling to
right,
render.
right, trying to keep up with happenings back home. Yeah, yeah, and just trying to use my tools at work, and I think it became clear that certain practices were prohibitive and expensive, um, you know, to actually use and run on even on a laptop in slower connection speeds. And yeah, I mean those problems persist through today. Um, it's just sort of like a wider array of experiences every year, and you get the low end and the high end experiences are getting better and sort of gradually better at the low end. But yeah, it's just broader concerns to care about every year that we work in this field. So yeah, so far it's stayed interesting and applicable to focus on relatively the same ideas of, building resiliently and, aiming for broader audiences.
Yep, yep. Now, for those who've followed the stream, say from the start, but even midway through, you'll remember that I've had a couple guests from WordPress. I've had Jakob, I just mentioned Jakob Gross from Framer, and now I definitely want to talk to Scott about working where you're at right now, which is Squarespace, and everything that's involved in working literally at scale. And again, I could bring up the example of Shopify last week, and they talked about making particular changes and watching them after things deploy and getting the data back and to see what it is that they need to improve. You've joined Squarespace. You're now on the performance team. What have you sort of like discovered from the start?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are millions of websites that run on this there's CMS, and they're all running on shared code base for the most part, but they're all very different websites in their own right. They're customizable by the customer, through the panel, but also through adding their own code. It's a developer tool as well. So so there's a lot of variety in the way that that Squarespace sites end up delivered over the web. So I guess a lot of the initial months that I was at Squarespace were spent auditing and just sort of getting a feel for how generally, like, how sites are delivered to users at different percentiles. We tend to focus, I think, across the field on P75, 75th percentile, making sure that that 75% of our users get a good quote unquote experience, usually through metrics like Core Web Vitals. But Squarespace is always aiming to broaden their audience. And I think the enabling effect of improving performance on P90 to 100 is really interesting, and has been proven in the past, and through other blog posts and other companies. So I'm always interested in that. We look at all percentiles, is what I mean, and try to figure out ways to, if a new feature is rolling out, how can we make sure that this experience is delivered exactly as design intended, while making sure it doesn't hinder anything on a really constrained device. So we have some pretty cool patterns that we've deployed in the last year or so that really aim for that. Like making sure that animations, staging for an animation when the page first loads. So like the elements are hidden and then they animate in, right? Very popular effect that a lot of templates use. Want to make sure things like that are done in a way that doesn't risk keeping UI elements hidden for too long, right? So there's like, sort of a threshold or a tolerance where if it doesn't happen soon enough and the scripts aren't loading and, the pieces haven't fallen into place, then just say, all right, just show it without the animation, things like that. So I think that sort of defensive work has been involved in many of the commits that I've landed in the last year, just looking for, potential points of failure, with third parties, whatever it is. Like, if this service is going to potentially have an outage and hang, we want to make sure that doesn't bring down, the experience in the process. So, I love that kind of work, and that's been that was a lot of the early work, I guess, that my team was working on when I first joined. Yeah, and then just in general, monitoring performance and trying to constantly improve it, because it's a platform that's been around for a long time, and like all products that have I wouldn't say legacy code, but like code that's always evolving. It's a challenge to constantly audit and maintain and make sure that things are using the right modern techniques. And so I feel like that's I love that kind of work. And it's more interesting to me than like building a website from scratch that needs to be fast. That's a very easy problem, compared to a platform that supports all these sites already, and bringing things up to speed where they aren't. I mean, it's just a constantly evolving challenge.
Here's a question. I have several, but here's a question. What is, if there is one in particular, for example, WordPress would talk about a particular issue that was, almost like a refrain. They saw it happening all the time, so they went and tackled that. I'm sure potentially, Shopify may have had their issues as well, like one in particular that came up a lot. Is there one, for whatever reason, that would be very common amongst SquareSpace user? Is there a particular bottleneck that they would sort of have more often than not, and that became like a source of just constant monitoring at SquareSpace?
Well, I think there's in any CMS,
Mhm.
I could probably generalize and say that there's always this challenge to figure out a way to smartly deliver only the code that a given page needs, while you're supporting a vast number of potential kinds of pages. And it's a really hard problem, especially as you are adding features, month after month for many years on end. So I think, like many CMSs, it's always a challenge for us to, minimize delivery overhead, like for CSS and JavaScript, and figure out smarter ways to deliver only what's needed. That's something that I'm pretty tightly focused on at the moment. So I would say, like, of bottlenecks, it's sort of like, we don't have as far as from a rendering perspective, JavaScript is not really like a major bottleneck for us, which is unusual. I think these days, like typically, we're sort of coming out of this decade of a lot of overly client-side dependent HTML rendering, even for blogs and ordinary websites that don't need to be so reliant on JavaScript on the client, at least for their HTML. And that's not really a problem anyway at SquareSpace. I mean, like, we have server rendered HTML, and that hasn't really changed over the years. So, other things add up over time that we do need to audit and try to figure out new ways to chop things up and deliver code more effectively and efficiently. So I think, like, CSS and in particular is one area that I'm focused on right now. And that's interesting because it's not usually a bottleneck, and I don't mean selector performance as much as just, trying to cut delivery overhead. But
Right.
yeah, but images have been a focus in the last like 3 or 4 years. Prior to when I joined, they've done a lot of great work to make sure that our images are running on picture element and source set and sizes, and no longer have JavaScript dependent HTML generation for images. That's such a huge deal. Just delivering image markup, standard based image markup in your HTML, so browsers can scan it even before they build the DOM and start fetching the images that come early in the page. really important. So that's something we've done, and converting to more modern formats. We're serving WebP across the board now, and things like that matter a ton. Yeah.
The good people at Remix would always shout about, well, I don't want to say they're shouting, shout outs to Ryan, shout outs, ha ha ha, to Ryan and Michael, but, they are bent on using the platform, as much as possible, not having to sort of like reinvent the wheel to serve something that the platform supports. I want to get back to something that you said, and the idea of doing defensive work. I thought that was very interesting the way you framed it. Like, did you want to sort of like expand on that, briefly?
Yeah, well, I think, there are, especially when third parties are involved, like, a script element that is pointing to a JavaScript file that lives on someone else's server that you don't control. Already, like the red flags start popping up, right? For many reasons when you do that, but it's a very common thing that, most popular websites do. And yeah, so in cases like that, can you make sure that it loads in a manner that doesn't block rendering, just in case it never loads at all? Adding a defer attribute or an async attribute, something like that. In our case, third-party fonts sometimes use JavaScript, making sure those load asynchronously, and that the page elements are, like if you're using font rendering that blocks typography from showing at all while custom fonts are loading, got to make sure that that doesn't happen for too long, right? Like there's built into the browser now, we have font display settings that do that for us. But sometimes if you're working with font providers that are loading the very rules that define your fonts using JavaScript, you have to kind of manually reproduce a lot of those steps to make sure that you get a really smooth page rendering process, while ensuring that we're not going to wait too long for this custom font to load if the connection's really slow. So yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of like similarities in the patterns that we apply for defensively, loading a feature until we see that, okay, we need to figure out a different strategy or build in a strategy to make sure that it doesn't hold things up for too long. Yeah, so I don't know. I'm trying to think of maybe another will come to mind.
I just thought it was very interesting the way you mentioned it. It's like defensive, work, and I'm trying to, I'm picturing you with a shield, and try to make sure that things aren't too crazy, and then you're almost like protecting the code base, from madness. Which actually then brings me to this question, because this came up last week with Yoav and Matt from Shopify. They mentioned that they obviously deploy to their merchants, but they also have to work with merchants who also tinker with the code themselves, and sometimes make some changes that they have to manage and monitor. Is that do you see some of that happening at Squarespace as well?
Yeah, we do. I mean, we have the concept of custom code that you can add blocks to your site that use whatever you need, and oftentimes those that's freeform enough that you can end up pulling in practices that can be can slow down your page. So yeah, we have some articles on Squarespace's blog that talk about if you're using custom code, watch out for these gotchas. Yeah, it does come up. I think when we find Squarespace sites that have like through audits that have render blocking scripts, usually it's because of custom code on that site. So yeah, it's an educational issue, I think, and figuring out like the right places to document these things and blog about them. Mm-hmm.
Excellent point, which brings me actually to the following. And you just mentioned educational, we both sort of, had our bouts with making sure the community is as up to speed as possible. You had a course, which I'm sure and I know did extremely well. Do you have Squarespace users coming back to, the company saying, hey, how do I improve my performance? Because we are seeing that conversation now, which was not, say, happening 4 or 5 years ago, where, these mom and pop shops or just, small companies, they're using Squarespace, but they want to make sure that their performance is, tops because they hear performance is important. Have you had that challenge in trying to explain to them, trying to walk them through what performance best practices are?
Yeah, we have a little bit.
Mhm.
Squarespace has a lot of like customers that are creatives with photography
Mm,
businesses, things like that. So it's always been, concern for us to make sure that we don't sacrifice quality when we're delivering images with new formats. So we've definitely, we get feedback from customers about, you know, about that. Like, I'd like my images to load faster, but don't cut on quality as well.
yeah,
I've
of
heard that
course.
discussion before. And yeah, I think like just in general, uh, business owners seem to be more aware of core web vitals in particular, and that's great. Um, and we have Google, and they're incentivizing to thank for a lot of that. It's become common knowledge more and more
Mhm.
among people who aren't even web developers necessarily. Um, so yeah, I think there's been a fair amount of that. Yeah, and my job has been sort of a split between acting as sort of like an internal consultant, where teams or perhaps customers and teams come to the performance team with known issues they want to fix or improve on, or me going out and finding problems. And it's probably more of the latter than the consultant part
Mhm.
of the role. But yeah, I mean, that sort of work is interesting. We have rum that is the source of truth, and we
Mhm.
can see how performance is going, so to speak, across all of these sites that run, all of the live users on all of these sites that run on the CMS. And it makes for quick decision making, being able to try out ideas after we've proven them out in, first in experiments, and then in, very small subset of users. And then, we get very quick answers at that scale. So, yeah, it's been really, it's been a great learning experience for me to see which practices are, particularly working well.
Awesome. And is there anything interesting that you've seen combing your rum data? Because again, it comes at such a volume that you could likely pick out patterns. And is there something that's been eye opening from discovering from looking at some of your rum data?
Yeah. Well, I think like just continuing on that theme of being exposed to the truth of how things are really working out for actual people. Um, you know, Seeing in rum that like P90 scores in the US are like P60 somewhere else with more, constrained conditions to
Mhm.
connectivity and, more budget level devices. To me, that's just, it's inspiring to see
Mhm.
that there's more work to do, and that, changes we make can actually move the needle. And, so I love to be able to, see that in rum and see that, okay, this region is looking pretty good, but this is the same website that's being delivered, to this region, and it's a very different story, right? I've been saying that, for like decades now, but it's very different to see it, proved out in real user measurements and be like, okay, let's
That's
get
awesome.
busy.
No,
There's more work to do.
that's awesome. And, it brings me back to the idea of, Google's formerly sort of this project that they had, uh, next billion or next billion users, where they're just really focused on making sure that people outside of, like, the classic G7s or G20s even, but likely G7s, uh, in areas with spotty connectivity, how would you improve that? And part of it is making sure that, you are aware of some of these devices and some of these constraints, and,
Mhm.
looking at rum data like you did, or pardon me, like you do, is what brings that up. SquareSpace, international. I mean, based out of New York. Obviously well known in America, but you have clients all over the world, obviously, right?
Mhm. We do.
And that's how you're able to see sort of like gaps in performance.
Well, yeah, there's customers that use the website builder, the CMS.
Mhm.
We have other products beyond that, but
Mm.
that's the one my team tends to look at the most. And then there's customers of those customers, that go to their websites that they build on
Mhm.
the tool,
True.
and all of those constituents are in my team's purview, I guess. So yeah, it's been interesting, to work at that sort of scale, and
Hmm.
yeah, and see see work, sort of on a longer term than I was used to in my agency days, when sometimes you'd hear back after you throw the code over the wall and see that they finally launched their site and it's doing well. But I always wanted to hear, usually wanted to hear more than than I could find out once the engagement was over. So yeah, it's fun to be actively involved day to day. You know.
That's amazing. That's amazing. No, it sounds like, again, the rewarding work that I know Matthias has talked about. I know that Felix Arntz has also talked about over at WordPress, um, and a few others. But it must be very gratifying knowing that you can make some changes to a code base and just to vastly improve someone's experience, literally like overnight, and being able to sort of like monitor that yourself on an ongoing basis, after throwing the code over the wall, as you kind of mentioned.
Yeah, well, there's not so much of that anymore. It's it's more, the same team now, so, as opposed to the agency days. But yeah, I mean, I think it's fun. Like, to anyone, like, sort of pondering getting into performance more deeply, it's kind of somewhere between, a detective and a janitor. Like
It's true.
you're in there. You're figuring out what the problem is, and sometimes cleaning up after things you did in the past, or uh, maybe it was teammates, and you know yeah, I mean, I think it's rewarding in a lot of ways. Yeah.
So, what is a particular project that that has you or has Squarespace busy right now?
I would say it's sort of an ongoing, like, move the needle a little bit on LCP in particular. Yeah, it's been my focus. We're, of the core web vitals, like, we do well overall, but I
Mhm.
think IMP and CLS are much closer to great than good. And LCP is the one that I can see the most opportunities to improve. Um, so there's more work to do there that I'm still working on.
You had mentioned earlier that the team had made some significant improvements around the delivery of images. So, is this delivery improvement a result of what you saw was challenging LCP?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it
Mhm.
actually it was images. were a LCP bottleneck, sort of the primary one, before we moved to web standard based image elements. So, now that we're using picture and delivering picture and source set and sizes, rather than, before web standards had solutions for this, we were, resorting to something like data source and things like that. And then JavaScript would populate the source with something relevant. That was a while ago. And this all precedes me joining the team, but they did that work so that images were no longer the LCP bottleneck in a lot of cases. Once that went through, and then, serving WebP cut the weight of images dramatically. So yeah, there was a lot of work that the team did on all that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And yes, for those out there, performance isn't like turnkey start, everything's cool, all right, move on. It's like an ongoing situation. It's monitoring, especially when you have a situation where you have literally people tinkering with your work, and suddenly out of nowhere, you get slacked that your LCP just went through the floor, and you have to figure out like what just happened.
Yeah, that's why it's critical to have a bunch of different tools in place to make sure you do what you can to prevent a regression before it happens. Performance regressions, like you could have budgets built into your pull requests that run Lighthouse, and things like that have been around for years now. We use them. It's great. Really, it really works. There's like, bundle size detection, make sure you don't, increase your JavaScript package weight, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's all critical to daily maintenance, and especially when you're working on products that features are constantly rolling out, and a lot of web teams are in that situation. So
yeah, I would imagine. I absolutely would. And I feel like there's so much more that we could cover with respect to SquareSpace, simply because you also have like templates, and I'm sure user generated templates, or I'm assuming some for sale as well, that may when used may cause regressions in a user's performance. And again, I'm just kind of like going off some of the discussions that I've had in the past with like the WordPress people, because now they have a situation where they have to basically test particular templates ahead of time, to kind of like figure out if this is something that that needs editing or not. Scott, we're rounding out to about an hour, so I don't want to take up too much of your time, but if someone were super duper like dialed in to some of your work and wanted to hear more, how would they get in touch with you?
You can find all the information you need on my website, scottjehl.com. I'm pretty active on Blue Sky, Mastodon here and there, LinkedIn regrettably often as well. And try to get outdoors as well. So I'm sort of intermittent on all those, but that'd be great. Love to hear from you.
Well, absolutely. And I mentioned it earlier, and I'll sort of ask you, is that web performance course that you published like 2-3 years ago, is that still available?
Yeah, I have a couple courses. One, lightning fast web performance, was acquired by Catchpoint a couple of years ago. I would say, for one thing, it's free. So check it out. You can skip through the modules and pick and choose what you want to listen to, but I think a lot of the practices hold up. And my more recent course is on web components, and there is a fair amount of performance sort of boilerplate knowledge that is built into that course. And I was interested in teaching or talking about web components in general because I think they're they offer a lot of opportunities to improve performance. So it's sort of paired well with things that I was thinking about anyway. So yeah, that's on my website as well. Web Components Demystified. So yeah, that's those are out there.
Amazing. Scott, I once again want to thank you for spending the last hour with us. It's a delight to have you on. And again, I was always very interested in how, uh, things were sort of like working over at Squarespace, because I'd met a few people in the past who had sort of like, well, working at Squarespace would mention like how they were trying to tackle performance and whatnot, but I'd since lost touch. But
Okay.
it was nice to hear how
Yeah.
a modern Squarespace is handling everything that's going on right now, as you mentioned, looking after core web vitals and making sure the LCP is which is again one of the more important of the vitals.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's been really good to talk with you. It's been a while, and
I know it
I really
has.
appreciate getting to come on your show.
So, folks, thank you very much. Thanks for joining. As usual, like I mentioned, I'll have this up and ready next week. And if you do have anything you want to bring up, find me on socials, and we'll take it from there. All right. Cheers.
Cool.
And you
Thanks,
do
everyone.
not go anywhere.
I'm here.
All right. Hold on. I'm going to end the stream. Just like that.